All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Thank you for being here, everyone, and welcome. My name is Fruckman Chavez with Bay Area Organization Development Network. I feel like at one point, I'm gonna slip up and say a different organization. I do apologize. I feel like I wear too many hats. But for today, I am with the Bay Area Organization Development Network. And if the folks in the room would also like to identify themselves as part of the board as well as the advisory council, please go ahead and feel free to say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
My name is
everybody.
Mai. I'm part of the board, VP. Good to see everyone.
I'm Esty. I'm part of the advisory committee. Good to see you all.
I'm M, and I'm director at large on the board.
I'm Nan, and I'm the Director of Education and Programs.
And I think John may have just slipped out real quick. John, are you there?
He's helping somebody get in.
Okay. Got it. John is our wonderful treasurer. And again, thank you all for being here tonight. We do have a wonderful panel tonight, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So for folks who just joined us, if you haven't yet, please type in where you're zooming in from in the chat, and we'll read that. We'll read those out loud as we continue. For tonight, we do have the Allyship panel. We'll have some updates after the panel, and then we'll go ahead and close the night. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nan.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to introduce the panelists in a moment. This is going to be our agenda for tonight. We're going to have formal and informal introductions. We're going to ask the panelists to tell us what brought them to this path of allyship. We're also going to state what the definitions are. And then we're going to talk about collaboration, tools for stressors, exposure levels and change, commitment, wins and triumphs, and the journey. We'll have questions and answers at the end. You can also put your questions into the chat if you don't want to hold your question until then, and then we'll read that out later for you. So let me start with the formal introductions tonight. Our three panelists are Dr. Kwame Cooper, Mai Liu, and Emily Bowen. And as you noticed during the introductions, Mai is vice president and Emily is director at large. Dr. Kwame Cooper has had an extensive resume of service to the community as a social justice advocate for diversity. As a retired assistant chief with the Los Angeles City Fire Department, Dr. Kwame advocated for diversity and justice for 38 years. The philosophy that inspires his involvement in these efforts is a rooted belief that all people deserve to have access to information and institutions that will help them live better and safer lives. Over the years, this work has taken him into diverse communities from Watts to the Caribbean, Central America, Portugal, South Africa, South America, Ethiopia, and Argentina. He has designed and instructed leadership and fire safety curriculum and spoken in various diverse settings promoting fire safety and healthy relationships between sectors of society. Mai Liu is the vice president of the BAODN, the Bay Area OD Network, and Mai is a global people strategy and experience leader at PricewaterhouseCoopers with deep experience in curriculum development and implementation. As a social justice advocate and ally, Mai has a background as a certified public accountant with a master's in industrial organizational psychology from Golden Gate University in San Francisco. Mai channels her life experience and 12 plus years of performance consulting skills to lead a portfolio of multi-million-dollar human-centered transformation initiatives that have touched millions around the world. Mai sees herself as a servant leader who uses her superpower of empathy to lead teams and organizations through the uncomfortable work of change with the hope of building a stronger sense of inclusion and belonging for all. And finally, Emily Bowen is a director at large for the Bay Area ODN. Emily is a holistic leadership consultant, curriculum designer, facilitator, and educator with a wide background in psychotherapy, leadership, and organizational development, racial equity for adaptive leadership, and courageous conversation. And she specializes in helping people learn healthy ways to address conflict. Emily holds a master's degree in applied behavioral science from Bastyr University, Kenmore, Washington. They are a founding member of the Peace Innovation Network, a collaboration between Stanford's Peace Innovation Lab and The Hague. Emily has a blended past of advocating for people with disabilities, leading nonprofits, working in healthcare, technology, the film industry, education, the arts community, and celebrating and collaborating with unusual and unorthodox organizations. Emily supports people improving their whole system health with compassion for the obstacles they face. So that's the formal introduction. I would now like each of you to talk a little bit about how you got into this kind of work. And we'll start with Dr. Kwame.
Thank you, Dr. Nan, and welcome everyone. It's good to see smiling faces, especially for Daryl Sawyer, who's 3 hours ahead of us. Appreciate everybody being here. My involvement in social justice really comes out of my birthplace. Being born and raised in New York, in Harlem, in South Bronx, and being involved in early social justice initiatives at a very young age, 14 or 15 years old, as a result of, as we know, systemic racism, overt racism, all the stuff that folks have been fighting, especially Black folks in this country, since we were brought here as slaves. So it's all part of my DNA. But the interesting thing is that as I get older, I start to really live what it looks like. So it's one thing to see it on television and see all the movements and be a part of some of that, but it became quite different when I joined the LA City Fire Department in 1980, where having been in LA for 2 years and having a certain sense of how people should work and struggle together for fairness. And when I joined the fire department, it was quite the opposite. And so that work continues today in my involvement with many fire departments around the country with regard to helping them develop healthy organizations systemically, and also ensuring that the quality of service is consistent in all neighborhoods, and with respect to diversity, that achieving it is one thing, but being able to live together in a firehouse among diverse members is a whole different dynamic. So needless to say, the politics of this country is fueling significant conflicts in the fire stations. Oftentimes people don't know about that. And so that's both sad but exciting, because it's what inspires me to continue to do what I'm doing.
Thank you, Dr. Kwame. Em, would you like to tell us about your background?
Sure. From the intro, you probably could tell that I have pretty eclectic interests. I've always been invested in positive change that brings more health. So when I was 25, well, actually, I'll go back a little further even. I grew up with a disabled brother who has cognitive impairment, and watching how he was treated in our communities was very eye-opening. Then as a young adult, I worked with folks with cerebral palsy and also became aware of struggles around dehumanization of disabled bodies. And then in my mid-20s, I became a massage therapist. And I really took this perspective of, not in a religious way, but that it was an honor to hold each person and see them in their full humanity and view them as a child of God. And so being able to kind of create a practice like that really brought into focus all the ways that that's not how we tend to treat each other in our culture and in our society. I also had, in early childhood, lived in a predominantly Mexican community in Northern California. So I also had this like contrast of, close, very loving, very celebratory culture compared to the more like Scandinavian, standoffish culture in the Seattle area where I was raised for most of my life. So I could see that there was contrast. There's different ways to do things. There were ways that people felt more alive and ways that people felt more shut down, more depressed, more isolated. I trained as a psychotherapist. I saw that that was really a challenging field because a lot of it is problematizing people and commodifying people's mental health in a way that wasn't about them having their own best outcome. It was about making them into consumers of systems. So I moved into organizational development and leadership education, where I was lucky enough to connect with folks who had really prioritized that all of us who were developing curriculum needed race equity training so that we could cause less harm and know how to do repairs when we did cause harm. And then certainly living in Oakland for the last 11 years has brought new awareness, whether it was Occupy Oakland, Black Lives Matter, other issues, bringing into the focus just how inequitable things are in our country, in our town, and how there's systems set up to make that be exactly the way it is. So with organizational development, with anything, I'm always looking for the biggest point of leverage. Like, what can we change that gives the greatest positive outcome to the most people? And I think disrupting systemic inequity, while it is a marathon, while it is a big calling, that's where that is. So that's what I get excited about, is how do we rehumanize and how do we remove policies that are clearly racist? I feel like it's almost a side note that I'm a non-binary person, because living in the Bay Area as a non-binary person, I haven't really experienced any lack of privilege. I'd say if I experienced lack of privilege in my life, it was that for most of my adult life, I weighed 100 more pounds than I do right now. And so I had the dehumanizing experience of fat phobia and body shaming to inform that's what's happening to a lot of us, because people are judging our bodies based on misinformation they have about what makes a body worthy. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Em. And Mai, would you like to share your background now?
Yeah. So I would say that as part of my story, I was born and raised in Houston, Texas. So growing up in Texas, you can probably imagine that there were different lived experiences that I had there growing up. And so I was very acutely aware that I was different in many ways, shapes, and forms. I identify as an Asian American woman. And so, I understood that difference for a long time. And honestly, if I were to reflect on my journey as far as allyship and that work, I don't think that I got it until the murder of George Floyd last year. If you had asked me, before, I would have told you that I got it, but I didn't. I really didn't. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that, because there are so many of us that can wear multiple hats throughout this journey. For me, once I realized that there was work to be done, it all started with the racial healing that I needed to do first within. And so when it comes to social justice work and allyship, it's important to be aware of where you're coming from and your inherent biases. And Dr. Ibram Kendi's work is wonderful, and he describes it that we're all being rained on. All of us are being rained on as part of the systems and the communities that we're raised in. Whether or not we're conscious of it, that's part of the journey. And so I've been rained on all of my life, and that rain told me that I'm part of a culture that's undesirable, a culture that needs to be silent, that needs to be quiet, that should not speak up, should not speak back, should do as they're told. And that's how survival looks. And that's what my role in America looked like for most of my life. And unpacking that is very painful. It's a very painful process because so much of my identity was connected to some of these harmful norms that I had learned about myself. And so part of that healing was, first of all, acknowledging that there was healing to be done. And then realizing the power of voice and my lived experiences growing up, and then using that to help really propel the need for the work that needs to continue for our lives. This is hundreds of years and generations of systemic oppression, pain, to M's point, hurt. People have died, and there's a lot of work to be done. And so my journey as a change leader, my journey with my superpowers of empathy are really how I help to carry the movement forward. And I have the ability to humanize the work that needs to be done by telling the stories of what I've gone through. But it's also important to connect the dots that racism is not a one-on-one thing. It's a systemic, institutionalized, long-term marathon that we're running here. It's not going to change overnight, and not just by one person. It's the collective that's really going to help move the needle forward. To M's point of what's going to cause the biggest positive outcome of change, it's really the collective that's going to help move this. And so I do this work for not only for my own personal continued lifelong healing. As a lifelong learner, there's always more to learn in this space. But from the perspective of, for me, the humanity and what we deserve for our future, for our children's futures, that's why I do this work. As painful as it is, it's important.
I would like to thank all of you for your courageous sharing. I would also like to move forward to have you define for the participants the meanings of allyship and diversity. And I'll start with you, Mai, why don't you go ahead and tell us what your definitions are for that?
Yeah, so I like to keep things simple as much as possible because we're talking about some hairy, complex topics. For me, allyship is the uber emotional, intelligent person. And so what I mean by that is when we think about emotional intelligence, it's about being aware of your own self emotions, and then the actions that you take about those emotions. And then if you think about a 4-quadrant box, it's also being aware of others' emotions and the actions you take based on those emotions. And so allyship is about understanding another person's point of view and acting on for that person's point of view, especially when they're not in the room. Whose voice is not on the table that should be, or whose voice is not being spoken towards that should be. So I would define allyship as being the uber emotionally intelligent person that can acknowledge and recognize the voices, the points of view that are not in that room, that should be in that room, and taking action so that those voices can be heard, whether or not they're in the room. So I would start with that for allyship. And as far as diversity goes, I really enjoy a lot of the thought leadership that's out there with regards to defining diversity. Iko Bethea is a wonderful thought leader in the diversity, equity, and inclusion, social justice space. So I use a lot of her work as inspiration for how I define things too. Diversity means difference between individuals that's material. And by material means that there are systemic advantages or disadvantages or access to privilege that equate to that difference. So for example, we might have gone to the same school, like your class of 2009, oh my gosh, your class of 1998. that doesn't materialize into like a significant difference as far as access to or lack of access to privileges that are available to you. So when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about groups of people that have different access to privileges or don't have access to those privileges. So often that can be, depending on where you are in the United States, for example, there's like legal protected diversity in the United States. So sometimes it's helpful to define it based on some of those terminology.
Thank you for that. Dr. Kwame, would you like to define diversity for us and also equity versus equitable?
That's an interesting question. So I'll start with diversity, and I'll just keep my comments just in the context of public safety. And so to Mai's point, in public safety, even today, diversity is oftentimes defined by lack of or thereof a diverse group of individuals. And what we mean by that is simply centered around race and gender. And so those are the driving, that's the kind of the working definition in terms of the fire service, looking at diversity from that lens. However, many things have shifted. And so notwithstanding the importance of race and gender, it is now a conversation that's being driven by different individuals' values. So the diversity of values, beliefs, cultural practices. What else could you say? Generational diversity, right? So you got perspectives. And so all of these different things are converging in the fire service as the fire service is trying to achieve diversity. And it kind of shows up in different ways in the work environment. Oftentimes, people would say in the fire service, there are three things that we don't talk about, with respect to diversity. And those three things are race, religion, and politics. But the reality of it is that's all we talk about. We just don't know how to do it in mixed company. And so basically what you'll end up seeing is the white guys go over here, the black guys over here, the Latinos over here, the Asians over here, the women over there, your sexual orientation over here. And everyone comes to a different conclusion. And that's dangerous, quite frankly, because we depend on each other at emergency incidents. So that's one of the big challenges in terms of the shifting definition of diversity as I see it. Now, Dr. Nan, you also asked me about how do I define equity, right?
So equity versus equitable. How do you differentiate those?
So equity to me is like the manner in which everyone has equal access to everything. And I know M talked about systems. So one of the challenges in the fire service is that the systems as they are designed are not equitable. And so an example would be, we want to hire female firefighters. However, based on the design of the system, it has adverse impact on female firefighters being able to do the work. And that's a challenge, right? When it comes to equity. So to what extent does everybody have equitable access? Equity access. When you ask me about equitable, wow, I have to really think about that, to be honest with you. Can somebody help me with that?
Em, you want to take that on?
Well, my first thought, and I'm open to having anyone help riff on this, is to me, equitable could be in a specific decision. Is this decision equitable? Versus equity, I see as that bigger picture. Is there gender equity in this space? Is there race equity in this space? Are we acknowledging those systems that have oppressed certain populations and doing something to make some meaningful adjustment?
Thank you. Thanks for the lifeline.
And that's a great point. Like, we do this work better together, right? This is This isn't the work of individuals, and it isn't the work of egos. We get into lots of places that are problematic with that. You know, white folks especially have places where we either want to not focus on race because it's not impacting us and we'll do it next year or in 10 years or whatever, or we have a white savior complex where we're trying to save everybody and we don't realize that that puts us in an uneven relationship with other people that's not equitable. Right? So, and I know that because I've been around other people who've taught me the difference, taught me what of my behavior might have been playing this white savior and like, I'm going to fix it, versus seeing people in their whole capacity to lean in and address any challenges that they have. Like, no one needs me to be a white knight, but I need to, and I'm going to do it right now, stop talking and keep listening, because that's where the learning is.
Thank you for that very much. And I think that leads into the next question, which really is about collaboration. And I'd like the three of you sort of to just kind of build on each other in this. I mean, what is collaboration in this space, and what does it look like in an organization?
Yeah. I'll share to the group that we did do like a little bit of a trial run between the panelists, and we had a blast, and we didn't even really know each other, but it was fun just to connect, because on the point of collaboration, there is such joy in this work, but also such heaviness to this work. And so when it comes to, I'll speak to collaboration and what that looks like in the workplace from a wellness perspective. I particularly enjoy having community when it comes to, I mentioned before, I identify as Asian American. I have my employee resource group at work that is a space for honest conversations about how things are going or not going. And not only just for a place to talk about, you know, problems that we're facing and the camaraderie that exists when you have some, you know, collective understanding and validation of what you're experiencing, but also a place that can be where we can problem solve together and have a collective voice when it comes to raising the things that we experience and the changes that we want, you know, management to take. So from a collaboration standpoint, I find that there's spaces for you know, communities to talk about the things that are lived experiences together, but also even besides the community that I identify with. I find joy in having others' perspectives in the conversation, even though I'm a lifelong learner. There's it's because I'm a lifelong learner that this work continues to be a place of joy and passion for me, because there's always more to learn. Like, if anyone says they have the answer to everything, they're lying, because no one, if they figured it out, they should have told us years ago so that we could stop this madness. So there's no one person that has a silver bullet or the answer to everything. It is long-term work, and you need to have a collective community to help you go through the ups and the downs, because you're going to have the ups and the downs emotionally. And some days I feel like giving up because it's such a, you know, a boulder to push forward. But then, like, if there's moments that in a collective group that remind us that there's little wins, it's those things that help to balance the experience. That collaboration really helps from a wellness perspective in this work.
Thank you for that. Em or Dr. Kwame, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I could talk for hours on that question, but I'll keep it short because Mai really said some really important things. And one of them is that I've learned is, so what's the problem we're solving, right? So getting some clarity around that. And in the fire service, it historically has been and still is oftentimes organizations of color, especially African Americans and women, who speak out the loudest when it comes to work environment, when it comes to how they're treated, how us have access to promotions, because the culture of the fire service is really competitively driven, both at emergency incidents and also when it comes to moving up the ranks. And so if you're white and you're not feeling any of this stuff by virtue of privilege, then you may not really feel any kind of way about it, right? You might have an attitude like, hey, Kwame, you just got to work harder. Or the worst thing you could say is, you should stop being so sensitive. Well, I kind of been Black all my life, so that ain't going to happen in America. But when we talk about collaboration, the thing that I learned was, and there are several significant changes that were led by the Black firefighters in Los Angeles to change systems. And once those studies were done and there was proof of systemic racism, biases, all of the things that we now fight against, one friend of mine's very close friend, happens to be white, called me up on the telephone. I was a captain and president of the Black firefighters. And he says, hey, Kwame, I just saw you on the news and you called the fire department all kind of names. I go, yeah, it was true. We have proof of it. And the fire chief is resisting. So, we have to take it to another level. He said, listen, I got to tell you something. I had no idea how bad it was. Could you please educate me on what you have been experiencing, man? Because I have no idea. And so that collaboration, that conversation deepened our relationship, deepened his awareness, whereas he now became more mindful about some of the subtle things that occurs in a fire station. So in my experience, the stronger the collaboration, and what I mean by that is people from different ethnic groups, gender, sexual orientation, whatever all of those things are, the more of that comes together with common language, with common purpose to work toward achieving this, then the entire collective benefits from it. And the other thing that I know about collaborations is that, as Mai said, yes, there will be some ups and downs because of the politics of this and that, okay? But the one thing I know is if I'm collaborating with someone and I have a relationship with them and we trust each other and we have freedom of communication, which, hey, don't take it personal, but this is kind of my perspective, that transcends itself over a long period of time in terms of being able to sustain that collaboration. And why is that important? Because of racism in this country. And we will continually have these types of opportunities to fight through the different movements that we all see. You pick whichever one they might be. I'm not stuck on any of them. But the point is, are they designed to make the United States better? Are they designed to make organizations healthy? Are they designed to make fire departments more effective in terms of how we deliver service? And once you have that, then with me, in my experience, I could work through anything. And I'm still working through it. And I've been doing this for a long time. So to Mai's point, it's definitely a lifetime practice.
Thank you for that, Dr. Kwame. Em, do you have anything you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I absolutely do. So I'm coming from a day where I was in a 6-year DEI project that I'm working on with 12 other people. I'm going to name drop because it's not my name, it's their name. Leticia Nieto, who wrote Beyond Inclusion, Beyond Empowerment, is somebody that I get to work with and learn from. Tali Hairston is doing a lot around teaching people about cognition, teaching about the fact that humans are really looking for things to be afraid of. And we kind of have blind spots to all the things that are happening that are not triggering survival reactivity. So this is where a lot of folks, myself included, you all included, we miss things. We get used to things being there. They had a study with Navy divers where they kept having them go down on dives, but then they realized that people weren't registering visually their surroundings because they didn't view their surroundings as threatening. So they stopped seeing things, right? And so when we have privilege, we stop seeing things that become normalized that we don't view as a threat. I wouldn't know that if I didn't have the opportunity to work with him. Yabom Gilpin Jackson is another just amazing thinker that I get to work with on this project. And I am so much smarter and more supported and playful. And also there are people on this call that have helped us revive the BayODN that I have learned from you. I'm a better facilitator. I'm a better curriculum designer because I know you, Dr. Kwame. Things that you have shared tonight are going to impact the way I show up the next time I'm teaching people how to step into this space. Learning from Leticia Nieto about self-awareness and about embodiment, and how so often in our culture we go really cerebral, and that we don't recognize that the pain people feel is physical. I think any one of us can think of a time where we were excluded in some way and that it hurt. And you didn't need somebody to ask you, were you really excluded or did you just take it the wrong way? Right? You know what happened. You know what that feels like. And if you're in a population that experiences that kind of consistent marginalization, consistent racism, it feels like something. It's not just a thought. It's a felt experience. And when we get to that, we also get to wonder about the fact that we're not in our bodies a lot in our society because it hasn't been safe for numerous different reasons. So I have this like bounty, plus I have support, I have playfulness. You all have taught me things that inform how I show up. They inform me not knowing. I am not the knower. I am the curious one. And I think that's the main thing I'm teaching other people in this work is to just not know. Don't be certain. Be curious, especially when you're sitting in the seat of privilege. And then there's the sustainability. We're not doing this work just because it's a fad or it's a thing that's happening right now. And so I saw an interview with Jane Fonda where she said that somebody asked her back in the 60s, like, how are you making sure you're having fun being an activist? And I think that's really crucial because a lot of times this is serious stuff. And we must have levity and we must have playfulness and we must have time off and we must have beautiful self-care, radical self-love, as Sonia Renee Taylor talks about. But for me, being in community with people, getting to collaborate, I worked with folks on a leadership 2-year program up in Washington today as well. 9 of us are talking about how do we make this equitable? And it wouldn't be the same if somebody hired me to design a curriculum for a program. So I'm smarter with everything that people put into the room. I can make it more humane when I can discover by being teachable and open that certain practices aren't humane for you. Maybe you're neuroatypical or you're on the autism spectrum or you have an invisible disability. Maybe there's only men and women's bathrooms and you don't really identify as either one in the space that we have. So I need people to see me as teachable, and I need to keep learning so that so that everybody can come to the party. I have a high inclusion need, clearly.
That sort of leads into the next question. And I'm actually going to squash two questions together because I think this is a perfect place to talk both about exposure levels for people who are, first time being exposed to this work, and they're facing change, which is often uncomfortable. So what kind of tools do the three of you use individually to help increase safety in the environment so people can disclose? Because you're sharing a lot with us. So how do you help other people share like this? And who wants to take that? Maya's shaking her head. Do you want to tackle this one, Maya?
I saw Kwame jumping up. I don't know. Kwame,
Okay,
did you want to start?
Well, that's a very good question. And so for me, it's a lifelong practice. It isn't a place that I get to and I'm like, okay, I have arrived, right? So I know that I'm constantly transforming in a way that I do things with regard to helping others, the social justice space, but also making sure that I include self-care because, M talked about in my translation, having this balance in your life to ensure that whatever those 7 or 8 areas are that are important, family, health, wealth, self-care, work, those types of things, that there's a balance so that for myself, that I'm giving myself the due nourishment that I need. And so self-care for me now, and Dr. Nan knows this, that I took on a new practice of martial arts. I've always been a body person, i.e. Martial arts, yoga, things like that. But I took on a new practice in Tai Chi, which is a phenomenal form of meditation and exercise and being absolutely present to every movement that you're making. So the practice of mindfulness in the space of change as it relates to understanding and leaning in and listening to what other people are saying in a way that we could turn down the volume in our head so that our biases and judgments aren't pecking away with everything that M is saying. So when M was speaking, I'm being drawn in. I'm like, I'm feeling you. Okay. And so that's a mindful practice of self-care. And I have found it to be extremely valuable when we're dealing with change, because we are all coming at life from our informed experiences to this space. And the more I can listen from the standpoint of understanding, and then when I think I understand, then I need to ask a question. And then when I get an answer, I need to ask another question, and another question, right? Because basically I'm pushing down all of my biases, causing myself to be vulnerable in a totally different way. And that's where the power is at. As a Black person, for myself, I've been trained not to be vulnerable. Are you kidding? A Black man in America? Shoot, I got to have something in my back pocket to protect myself. Well, today is a little bit different when we're talking about working with individuals like yourselves in a way that we are willing to have those crucial conversations, those painful conversations where, we may have been harmed or there's some embarrassment around what it is that we want to share. And what I've learned is that in doing that, it only makes me stronger. It just makes me a better person. Now, I always tell my friends I keep my knife in my back pocket because, we do got some mean people out there. But in the space of change agents, people like us that are really trying to get this right, that the care for ourselves is absolutely critically important to tend to. And so those are my thoughts, Maya. What do you think?
Double click yes on everything you've said. That double like button, absolutely. What I would emphasize as far as tools for change, and especially in this group of change leaders and change consultants, we know that change takes time, and we know that it's an intentional, leadership from the top down, bottom up, sideways. It takes that whole collective to change an organization's culture. Same approach when it comes to addressing systemic racism. And so I would say a tool to start is just start. And then what I mean by that is like that the phrase of, every journey begins with a single step. Getting involved in this work means, unlearning some of the things that we have learned over the years, and perhaps even, to Dr. Kwame's points of, challenging our own inherent biases. And that can feel very close to home. That can look like your church, your own family, your own friends, and that blissful ignorance that you might have had around racism not being prevalent in your world, when you start to learn, when you start to pick up a book, or you start to talk to anyone that happens to represent that is identifying in a diverse community, and you start to unpack, there's some pain associated with that, of like, oh my gosh, that word I used to say, oh my gosh, those things I used to do, oh my gosh, those habits I used to do. Now that you're aware, how will you do better, right? So it's not really about shaming anyone for the work that, someone might not have been conscious of. It's about knowing that you can do better, knowing that it's not okay to continue that. And so I think that's one piece of a tool that I would say is just start, and really just pick up a book. There's so much thought leadership out there. The other part of this is to, we're speaking on this panel, and everyone's here, like, with their time and spending their time together here. Recognize, though, that if you have someone that's diverse in your circle, in your community, and they might not have talked about any of these things with you before, I would ask yourself why they haven't. How close is that relationship if they haven't brought up some of these things, how they've experienced racism, how they might have, experiences that they might not have opened up to you about. And it's not their responsibility to unpack the things that are going on in your world. But it's also a way to really challenge yourself of, do I really know this person? Am I really that close? Do I really understand, to my point earlier, like being that uber emotionally intelligent person, do I really understand what they're going through? I'll share with you an example that's, personal for me, but also an important one. In the workplace, we talk about terms like, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Everyone bring your most authentic self to the workplace. It's a safe space. How do you build the safety, Nan, to your question? That is not a space that's created through on a whim. It's an intentional and trust-based approach that is, I like to use Brene Brown's analogy of marbles. There's trust marbles that have to be set. So within a small team, you build the norms on the team, and you build trust by, meeting expectations. You build trust by, sharing things that are vulnerable, that they're not meant to unpack like all the different things that have gone on in your past, but it's a way to let people into your world. So for me, an example of how that looked like was, I was on a team of about like 5 people. So it was a relatively small team. And most of the people on the team were white men. And so I was the only woman of color on that team. And that's a pretty common occurrence in corporate America, given that most of our organization's leadership is white men. And so I had a relationship that was based on trust with one of the individuals on this team. He and I had, worked together before. We had met each other's expectations when it came to work deliverables, had, talked about non-work things and had that rapport built. And he and I had a conversation about how I showed up a little bit differently on our team, and how I showed up differently was that I was more quiet. I didn't speak up as much in the meeting. It was really like in one-on-one interactions where I would really have, be more comfortable speaking up. But in the rooms when it's like all of the room is white, I was more on the quiet side. And so he and I had a conversation about that, and I actually talked to him about that and shared with him that part of my experience growing up, I actually have a fear of white men. I have a fear of white men. And that's because of my lived experience and some of the things that have happened to me growing up. And so if you can imagine a room full of white men, and that's my team, it often can feel, just inherently by the way the room looks, like a not safe space based on those lived experiences. And so these are the types of things that often marginalized communities come to work with and have to power through and put on the face and push even harder to show up as a leader, push through those challenges to speak up. Because if you don't speak up in corporate America, you're going to get run over, or you're not going to get noticed. And so when we talk about concepts like what's the term? Imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is an informal term that's used to describe the feelings of not being adequate, not deserving of the good things that happened to me, et cetera, et cetera. This type of imposter syndrome is like exponentially larger, more substantial when you think about some of the marginalized communities and what that level of imposter syndrome looks like when it's been something that's experienced over time. So I would say, Nan, back to your question, step one is starting to just take a step, one baby step, and just learn and unlearn something. Read a book, read the thought leadership that's already out there. There are already so many thoughtful, wonderful people doing this work. And then just know that you can still make an impact. You can make an impact, and you don't know the space of your impact based on the relationships that you have, because it's after those conversations with my team and that person that I connected with, he's been one of my biggest allies at this company ever since. He knows me. He knows me in some of that raw state. And without that, my ally, in that room with me, I wouldn't have been able to get to the places that I have been had I not said something. And so that trickle down effect does involve vulnerability on, these marginalized communities to say something. But when someone does give you the gift of telling you their story, don't just let it be a story that you let lay to waste. Take that and do something with it.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Maya. I really appreciate it. Now I'm going to, because of time, I'm going to skip forward a little bit and ask the three of you to share your wins and triumphs that you've had in this process. So who would like to start with that? Dr. Kwame, would you like to talk to us about your wins and triumphs in this journey?
Sure. And it's kind of interesting, that question, because so the initial wins were centered around exposing institutional, discriminatory, racist, sexist practices within the LA City Fire Department. And there were about 8 areas that were audited and created significant changes and opportunities for everybody. And in fact, it just reminds me, Maya, of a story where the same guy that called me and said, "Hey man, I didn't know it was that bad." And I go, "Well, yeah, like Black firefighters were segregated for 52 years up until 1955 in the LA City Fire Department. So, there's a lot of privilege and backlash as a result of, Black folks being able to work with white folks and all of that kind of stuff. For the white firefighters that didn't want integration, many of them, white firefighters, wanted integration, but they couldn't be friends with Black firefighters for fear of retribution from their colleagues. And so fast forward 1994, this stuff gets exposed, and now folks are having more access to stuff, to opportunities. And to my white friend, he basically said, hey, well, look, man, when I get off work, I just go home. I put this stuff behind me. I'm cool. I ain't got to worry about it. I go, well, for me, the color of my uniform is my skin. And so whether I'm at work or in the streets, I'm still being subjected to systemic stuff. And so that's how our relationship deepened. But the learning is making sure that the changes that are made within an organization, and they give you short-term wins. So we got wins over a 15, 20-year period of time, that they are designed to stick. Because after 94, we then had another big diversity breakdown in 2006, a bunch of audits, a bunch of lawsuits, a bunch of upheaval. Same thing in 2014. Same thing going on right now. If you Google the LA City Fire Department, unfortunately, we are catching the heat, if you will. Even though I've been retired for 2 years, I still work closely with the fire chief. And there's a lot of people that are angry about the same things that we were talking about back in 1994. So the point is that my learning, Dr. Nan, is to constantly survey the environment. It's just not a one-off where you put something in place and it's giving you the results that you want, but to constantly survey the environment in terms of systems. Constantly survey the racial, gender, climate within your organization, not because somebody tells you to do it, but because that is part of your proactive acumen as a leader. And you'll find that by you doing it in an authentic way, that there'll be some things that's going on, or individuals that are having a certain type of experience that aren't speaking out, but now someone's asking them, to Mai's point, so how's it going? And they have a lot to say. And so that's the thing that I've learned, Dr. Nan, and this is part of what I share with, fire service leaders, and, primarily, is do your own self-assessment. If I'm feeling sick, as opposed to me saying, you know what, I'll feel better, it'll go away. But yet this has been going on for 10 years. And finally I go see the doctor, and the doctor goes, hey kid, you got cancer. I go, what? No, I'm good. How long has this been going on? 10 years. Well, why are you just coming now to do something about it? And so I say that in a real honest sense, because this is part of, sometimes in my experience, where we get stuck as leaders, that we kind of marginalize other folks' experience and think that it's just a one-off. So my philosophy is, if one person is not having a good day and is not looking forward to coming to work to every day, then that's a sign that the organization is unhealthy. And it's my responsibility as a leader to lean into that space. It's not the individual's responsibility. So I would recommend that, Dr. Nan. And then the other part of it is have some fun with this. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but we get one lifetime at a time. And as social justice advocates, have your crew, your critical mass, work toward improving the lives of others, but give yourself some. Give yourself some, have some fun with this. And it just kind of makes the experience a lot easier, in as much as it is difficult.
Wow, thank you for that, Dr. Kwame. That's really great insight. Em, do you want to add to that? Talk about your wins and triumphs?
I feel like Kwame's been doing some amazing change for a really long time, from a different space than I am, and I want to acknowledge that. Like I am just honored that people were like, "Hey, you're white, but we believe that you'll speak the truth in these systems, and that we can help people learn until they can hear from BIPOC folks who are the source of the information." Right? I'm super honored to be a tool of people's education. It's amazing to watch those moments where people I'm teaching or coaching come back to me with their epiphanies, where something percolated and something started to change the way they were approaching things, or they just developed a little more space for a little more curiosity. Today, a colleague private messaged me and said, "I just feel like I can breathe deeper when you're here. Thank you for the way you show up." That is, thanks, Mai, for putting that in there. So to just know that, like, that's my gift, is my willingness and my curiosity, and to see it reflected in other people who are excited about the liberation of all people, and just really holding to my heart, like, I can't truly be free until you're truly free. That's my win.
Thank you, Em. Mai, do you have anything you want to add?
Just that this panel, man, y'all need to stop being so like tugging the heartstrings. This feels like deja vu for our little get together. I'm all kidding aside. I'm just I feel grateful to be here, and that I have 3 wins. So I'm going to cheat a little and I'll share my 3 wins. The first one is just me being here is a win. So me showing up in spaces that historically I shouldn't be, I'm not supposed to be, I have not been, just showing up in and of itself is a win in the midst of all the continued anti-Asian sentiment and hate that's physically threatening all of us. Me showing up is a win on some days, and that's enough. A second win that I also, would like to share is building on some of the points that Dr. Kwame and Em have shared earlier, is the connections and the power of those connections. So there's one story that I share that I have a friend who, he probably wouldn't call himself an activist or an ally or anything formally, super just, kind of go with the flow kind of guy. And he's been a part of my healing journey as well. And we had a conversation. He shared with me a couple weeks ago that, he was thinking about me, and I've, and in the sense of, like, I shared with him some of, my racial healing and some of my work just around just social justice and my points of view. And he shared with me, I thought about you the other week because I asked myself, what would Mai want me to do? What would she want me to do? And I was like, no, like who am I? Like what? And it was so empowering that the connection that we had made in together. And he thought of me because he had an opportunity at a moment in time to do the right thing or to say nothing and move forward. And so the context of this, he works in the technology space. And in technology, there's very problematic terms that are used often when it comes to some of the coding language, some of the program management language. For example, master and slave is often used when it comes to project management. Whitelisting or blacklisting also are also problematic terms. And so my colleague shared, this opportunity that he had. I was not in the room. We don't work together on the same project team at all. We're just, separately connected. And he told me that when he realized the terminology his team was using, he had a choice to make. He could just move on with status quo because it works. It's how things have been done before. But instead, he asked himself, what would expect me to do? What would she want me to do here? And he told the team that they needed to scrub all of those inappropriate terms and use more appropriate terminology in their project management language going forward. So that's a win because, even though it was a one-on-one interaction, I did not, it wasn't like we were connecting on social justice issues or anything. It was just a connection, a relationship. And to your question earlier, I had built that safety, trust between us and that rapport. And he was an ally and thought of me when I wasn't there and made the choice to do the right thing, even though for him it was a baby step. It was huge. It was huge. It's a win. It's a win. And then lastly, the third win that I'll share is it's a little bit more organizational related. So I'll bring it back to some of the org psychology concepts here. When it comes to some of our decisions that we help our leaders make when we're consulting with them, or even when you're working internally at a company, there's lots of companies are talking about return to workplace and remote work or hybrid work, or the how do we handle physically going back into an office? And I would encourage this community to talk to the leadership as they're making those decisions and ask the question, are the impacts from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective being considered in these return to office decisions? As we think about who comes into the office, who has the most access to come into the office, that often is answered by statistics and data that tell you who's closest to the city, who is historically viewed as the group of people who don't have as many family responsibilities at home, who are the people who might not live as close to the city for financial reasons, or might not have access to public transit. And so when you think about who that boils down to, the people who return to the office that have the most access to are white people, white men specifically. And so we've heard about the statistics around the mass exodus of women leaving the workplace through the pandemic, and the ask of them to kind of lead the charge at home. And that's been devastating to the workplace. When we think about the impact from a people of color perspective, I talked about earlier, I don't feel safe riding public transit because I might get attacked because I'm Asian. So why would I put myself in a place to be exposed unnecessarily to come back to work when there's so much anti-Asian sentiment going on? And so when we think about, again, the communities that are impacted by some of the policies implemented by our companies, there's an adverse impact that can happen if we don't ask the question. And so as consultants in the room, we can at least ask the question, did you intentionally make this decision while considering the implications to these other communities? And if the answer is yes, then it's a conscious decision that way. But at a bare minimum, at least ask the question, because I would hope that organizations are, and not thinking about just the bottom line or the dollar or whatever, but really the humanity behind some of these decisions is critical to assess. And so that was one of my wins, is we do include that in our decision making. And I'm part of the team that's helping with those decisions. And that for me was a win, in being able to make sure that we're including that when it comes to our return to workplace decisions. So those would be my 3 wins, Nan. I cheated. I'm sorry. I said more than one.
That's okay, because the last one is, I think, really great, and actually can be leading into the next question. The final question is the journey. Like, what one thing can you provide as a tip to everybody who's at this meeting as a place to start this journey with others? And I think your third item is almost filling that bill, but is there anything else you want to add before I ask Em and Dr. Kwame?
Yeah, no, I would double click on what I mentioned earlier, in that it's okay to feel overwhelmed. Just start with one book, one podcast, one whatever at a time, and just make the time for it, and don't stop.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Dr. Kwame, do you have one tip you'd like to add to this panel discussion about what would be good for people to do to start this journey?
Yes, but before I do that, I want to reveal the fact that among the many things that I've learned tonight, that I love Maya's expression of double clicking on something. So I'm gonna borrow that.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, although there's many things the one thing that I believe is really important when I'm dealing with people is to make sure that I keep my word and that I show up in an authentic way, as the grounding and basis for who I am. And so therefore, no matter what the environment is, I've learned that being who I am in a way that's authentic helps to improve the dialogue, improve the relationship, not allowing myself to get triggered based on my conditioning, that showing up in a way that really is demonstrating my willingness to, cooperate with respect to change. I found that to be very effective in the process, but I also have found it to be very helpful for me in terms of my own self-care and managing, stressful, quote unquote, situations. And so that's what I would recommend. And quite frankly, it's what I do today, is what I do now. And as much as sometimes it can be difficult, I find that the more I do it, then the more of a normal process it becomes in a visceral way. So I would recommend that. Dan, thank you for that question, Dr. Nan. That's a great question.
Yes, thank you for sharing. Do you have anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I feel like my answer is kind of twofold, which is one, learn that the moments you mess up become great anecdotes to invite other people to try, right? There's something really empowering working with people in equity work who can say, well, I'll take something from my own life. Last week, I was talking to a family member who struggles with schizophrenia. And during a walk together, I referred to something as being crazy. And then I caught myself. And then I realized I want to take that word out of my vocabulary because I really meant chaotic. And so there's ways that we have words, or there's practices that we have that are just routinized, and we don't have to be in that routine. We can take that moment, and then I, as a facilitator, can share that with you so that you know that even if I've been in this work for 5 years, 10 years, most of my life, there's still things that I don't know. There's still things that I'm working on the daily, that it's my job to realize and make some repair and change my behavior. So I think that that's really important. In the first chapter of Dolly Chug's book, The Person You Mean to Be, she really emphasizes learning to say people's names. If I don't know how to pronounce your name, if I don't know how to pronounce Fruck's name, I might not include him in the conversation. That's a place where if we can just make sure we take the time. How do you say your name? Fruck, could you actually come on mic and tell me how to pronounce your full name?
Man, that's going to cost you $1.50.
Okay.
It's Fructuoso Menchavez.
Fructuoso. So now I am going to involve Fructuoso in the conversation in a way that I might not if I look at his name and go, well, that's long and complicated. Guess what? Christopher is a long name. And most of us know how to say it, right? It's not about the length of the name. It's I'm unfamiliar with it. But it is so important that it's just one place to start, right? Tchaikovsky. We can say that, we're familiar with it. We can become familiar with names that are very common in other parts of the world and unique to just that person. But if we don't know how to say their name, out of some sense of embarrassment, we'll avoid including them in conversations.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to the panelists for your generosity of spirit and your willingness to discuss all of this with us. I'd like to open this up now to the audience for questions. And you can just come right on the mic if you'd like, open up your mic, and then be sure if you want to have one person answer your question to say their name and so they know the question is directed at them. Or you can put it in the chat. I'll read it for you.
Good afternoon. My name is Daryl Sawyer. I'm from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'm a division chief in my city fire department. I'm glad to be here. I found out about this podcast discussion last night, and you know I've been enlightened. I've learned a lot. I was at a conference with Dr. Cooper about a month ago, and he shared a lot of the information that he discussed tonight in the same forum. I'm just happy to be here. I guess my frustration is a lot of people that should be here aren't here. Yeah. Myself and a colleague who's listening, we are involved with a lot of these forums, and you know we don't know everything, but we know a lot, and we're well versed. But it seems that a lot of the people that need to be here, they're not included, and it's frustrating because you know we're doing the same old dance with each other, but we need to include others that can help us definitely make a change. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Dr. Cooper, I sent you a direct message. I hope that we can, you know, connect directly, but that's all I have to say. This was an excellent discussion. I learned a lot, and I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
May I, Dr. Nan?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so Chief Sawyer, yes, absolutely. I did respond back and gave you my personal information. And of course, you know, all that I have that I could do to help you, just consider that done. One of the things that I absolutely believe is information is not worth having if you're not willing to give it away. It's like, what's the point? So to you, Chief Sawyer, yes. And to your other point, I got to tell you, I used to feel that way. Like, you know, so-and-so needs to be here to listen to this, and so-and-so needs to be here to listen to this. But somehow I transform myself in a way that I'm just so grateful that I'm here to listen to this. And so therefore, it allows me to use the things that I'm hearing, the things that I'm learning to create the change that I want to see in my organization. And so please don't, you know, continue to put too much energy into whoever is not here right now, because of course, there's a way for you to transfer this learning to others as well as part of the change agent community. And quite frankly, that's just the way it is. It's just usually a little small critical mass of, troublemakers like all of us that want to change stuff to make it better. And so
Good trouble. Good trouble.
Good trouble. That's right, Molly. Thank you. I like that. Good trouble. Yeah. So Chief Sawyer, welcome to the club, my brother. Welcome to the club.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it's not in vain.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, we definitely need to expand the conversation. I think this is really a start, right? A very small start in a larger conversation that we need to have to make the table larger to invite more people. So I agree with you, Chief Sawyer, and I really appreciate that comment. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah, Nan, I would add to to Chief Sawyer's point around it's true, right? When we think about power and how power works in our society, or if we think about the analogy of like suffrage and voting, right? So back then women weren't allowed to vote, and as much as women pounded the table and said, I deserve a right to vote, it wasn't granted to women without the power of men, white men specifically. And so the people in power have to be in the conversation and be able to be in a place to actually listen and digest this to actually change behavior and change direction and course. So I completely agree that those that are in power need to be in the room. And even then, when we think about suffrage, it was really about white women voting at the time. It wasn't really everyone gets to vote. It was so like the cycle continues of like who really is in the club and not in the club. And the work is ongoing and lifelong and iterative. But I just wanted to acknowledge the space of like, yeah, it's asking people to sit with discomfort and to sit with that it's like going to therapy. Really having someone willingly go through that is a difficult charge to do, and but we gotta keep going.
I love that you brought up therapy, because I'm actually finding that in some of these culture change moments, that it's individuals' experience with going to therapy and developing some awareness about themselves and others. Maybe it's couples counseling or something like that, but I'm finding more spaces where people are like, oh, I did this with my wife. I could do it in my workplace, right? And us as organizational development practitioners, industrial psychologists, like, I feel like there's just a little more to grab onto, where people are having some skills, or even like younger generations. We have some younger folks on the call and in our organization who are growing up with more social emotional education. So they're going to have a savviness to do this that maybe myself as a Gen Xer and folks older than me might have some challenge, because we've been in the patterns we've been in for so long. But those of us who aren't willing to shift are going to become kind of irrelevant as younger generations are coming in. So I often try to look there for hope when I get frustrated with, older white men who don't have to change. It's like, well, actually you do, because people won't work for you anymore, and you won't be innovative, and you won't be the top company in your industry because you're celebrating mediocrity instead of true excellence.
People aren't going to put up with it.
Yeah.
And as I like to tell people, you can't stop evolution, and we're becoming more and more diverse on this planet. So there you go, right? We do need to have more people at the table and hear more voices. I would really agree with that. So would anybody else like to make a comment or offer, ask a question of the panelists? If not, I'm going to turn this over to Fruk to end our meeting for us.
Thanks, Nan. Just to go over some more slides with y'all. Can everyone see my screen okay?
We can.
Perfect. Awesome. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nan. Thank you to the panelists for being so awesome and sharing this courageous space with us. There's definitely a lot to still learn and unpack. And there we go. We do have some upcoming events. September 16th, it's currently tentative. We will be having a town hall forum on the state of work, back to the office, or stay at home. October 21st, we have a panel on healthy organizations and the bully-free workplace. November 18th, we have our signature event, 10-Minute University on Mindfulness. And we really are hoping to get everyone, together in the same room, hopefully around December, to just celebrate, the successes of each and every one of y'all, as well as, the successes of the Bay Area Organization Development Network so far. We do have some openings. Nan, if either of you can share any openings, call for members.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I, as pseudo interim marketing and communications lead for our nonprofit group, wanted to open it up to anyone who's interested in being part of the marketing and communications team. We have definitely the space and have an open leadership role there if you want to join our awesome team. Esty is also on the line, who's our awesome communications lead when it comes to our work. So definitely, if you're interested in anything related to marketing and communications or want to learn more about that, definitely join our work stream. Nan?
Yes, and you can contact me if you're interested in any program oriented activities. We hope to start a book club, and I have all kinds of things that I'm interested in. But if you have ideas, please bring them to me. I'm just interested to hear how you want to become involved. This is part of a community that we're trying to build, so we want to support each other. Yes, and before we finish, I just really want to thank the panelists for their generosity and openness tonight. I think this was a really wonderful conversation, and I hope we have more of these. I think we could have another whole evening on just the same topic, quite frankly. And I really learned a lot, and I think others did too. And I really felt very touched by everyone's willingness to share and be open.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Yeah,
Dan.
thank you, panelists.
And currently, if you have not signed up yet, we still have our membership drive summer special happening, where if you sign up to be a founding member of the Bay Area OD Network, you do get a 40% off after August 2021 and ongoing. These are the current, these will be the membership dues moving forward. So, if you haven't signed up yet, please feel free to do so. We encourage you. You're going to get so much out of it. And if you have any friends that you'd like to bring along, let them know. We'd be happy to have them. Some of the benefits really include a free or discounted virtual meetings and events for 2021, membership, being part of a membership directory, networking events, having an online resource, and really just opportunities to develop any skills that you want. We really want this. We really want the Bay Area OD Network to be a space where folks can hone their skills, and what better way to do that than to do it with community and in community with each other. And if you haven't yet, here is a link to our website. I believe someone will drop that in the chat. If you're very tech savvy, feel free to scan the QR code on your phone, and subscribe on our website. We'd love to have you all. If there's any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to email the Bay Area OD Network website or email. And I'm trying to release the polls. We'd like to hear your feedback directly about tonight's event. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll. Why did I launch it? Okay, I launched it.
You did. Success.
Perfect. We'd love to hear from you. And once you've responded to the poll, we are looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Yes.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for hosting. That was just fantastic.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you all.